As I've mentioned in the past, one of the main reasons I started this project was to figure out if there was any truth behind the common wisdom that the WonderSwan has so few standout titles that it isn't worth any of your time. One of the games that comes up in those handful of standout titles is this week's game, Makaimura for WonderSwan. Makaimura for WonderSwan is an original installment in Capcom's Ghosts and Goblins franchise, known under the name Makaimura in Japan. It was developed by Capcom, published by Bandai, and released on July 22, 1999. Ghosts and Goblins is Capcom's 8th best-selling video game franchise, so it's a historically significant one, but since the series peaked around the times that I was born, it's not unfeasible that younger gamers might have never heard of it. Ghosts and Goblins is a series of notoriously difficult side-scrolling action platformers originally released in the arcades. In the game, you play a knight called Arthur who must rescue a princess who's been captured by the villain of the version you're playing. You can only get hit twice before losing a life, and if you die, you get sent back to either the start of the stage or the midway checkpoint. Lives also have a timer ticking down, which means you not only have to deal with everything being thrown at you on screen, but you need to do it quickly. And on top of that, the game makes you complete a second loop of the game with a different special weapon in order to confront the true final boss and reach the true ending of the game. Because of the brutal difficulty level, people were overjoyed when the arcade games got home conversions, which would let them brute force their way through the game without a significant financial hit every playthrough. I mentioned that younger gamers might be more familiar with one of the series' spin-offs, so I'll go through those very quickly. The Gargoyles Quest series, which started on the Game Boy in 1990 and ended on the Super Nintendo with the widely acclaimed Demon's Crest, is a series of Metroidvania-esque adventure games where you play as Firebrand, an enemy character from the Ghosts and Goblins series. For 2000s kids, the Maximo games on PS2 also take place in the Ghosts and Goblins universe. Ghosts and Goblins music and characters also pop up from time to time in other Capcom games, and the Versus Capcom fighting game series. Makaimura for WonderSwan has two features that make it distinct from the rest of the series up to that point. Makaimura for WonderSwan is the first Ghosts and Goblins title to feature a more reasonable difficulty level. You might think this is because they knew the game was going to be played on the go, in less than ideal conditions where your focus level isn't guaranteed to be as high as it would playing in the arcade or sitting in front of your television. But I'm not so sure about that hypothesis though. Gargoyles Quest was notoriously difficult as well, and that was a Game Boy title. I bounced back and forth between two theories. Either they thought the WonderSwan would skew more towards children due to Bandai being a toy company, or they finally gave in to consumer expectations of console game difficulty and decided to make it more accessible than its arcade counterparts. Ultimate Ghosts and Goblins on the PSP, released in 2006, would go even further, giving the player a choice of 3 modes with a wide range of difficulty to make the series even more accessible to people who may have been intimidated by it in the past. Unfortunately, the later iOS installments in the series, released in 2009 and 2010, would undo all of this progress in making the game more accessible by asking the player to buy microtransactions in order to reduce the difficulty level. Not so cool. The other big distinctive feature in Makaimura for WonderSwan makes use of the hardware's unique quirks and is one we've seen earlier in Ganso Jajamaru-kun. One of the game's boss fights asks you to turn your WonderSwan into portrait orientation. It does so more elegantly than any other game on the system thus far to feature orientation changes by putting up a screen telling you to rotate the device, informing you of the new control scheme in case it wouldn't be immediately clear to you, and waits for you to press a button before taking you to the next area. Normally I would advise anyone planning on playing one of these games on an emulator to do so on real hardware, because it can get quite cumbersome to have to switch back and forth between control sets and rotate the screen repeatedly, but since this only seems to happen once throughout the entire game and the game deals with it so elegantly, it isn't too big of an issue. If anything, I feel it's a bit wasteful for the game to include portrait landscape switching at all when it's only used once in the entire game. Why aren't there sections where you climb up a structure in portrait? The series has a history of large imposing bosses, so why not use portrait orientation as a way to make players feel claustrophobic facing off against a huge boss in a narrower play area? Unlike games like Titanfall 2, which introduce a new mechanic to play with and keeps it around just for the right amount of time before it starts to get boring, the portrait mode boss in Makaimura for WonderSwan feels like it's teasing at the potential that there is in this idea, but then puts it back in the toy chest, never to be returned to ever again. That said, there's a reason Makaimura for WonderSwan keeps popping up on top WonderSwan game lists here and there. The platforming genre is criminally underrepresented on this platform, and not only is it a solid action platformer, but unlike the rest of the series, you can get through it without tearing your hair out. While the other games in the series are certainly more historically significant, and are definitely worth a play if you're interested in that, this is the one I would recommend to newcomers to check out because it's forgiving enough to be playable without also losing that original Ghosts and Goblins flavor.